I crossed the graduation stage alone, while my parents threw a Super Bowl party. I cried in the parking lot. Then bought a one-way ticket that completely changed my life forever. The morning had started with such hope. I woke up before my alarm, nerves buzzing under my skin as I slipped into my rented gown. Either the cheap fabric hanging from the closet door, like a promise I had earned inch by inch. 6 years of night lectures, early shifts, and quiet sacrifices led to this moment. I brewed coffee in the dark, breathing in the warmth, letting myself imagine just for a second that maybe today my family would meet me halfway. I wasn't naive enough to expect a parade, but I pictured my mother's soft smile in the audience, my father lifting a hand in that casual wave of his. I imagined my brother, pretending he wasn't bored, sitting still for just a moment to acknowledge the thing I'd worked so hard for. Ordinary things other families took for granted. Tiny gestures that would have told me, "You matter to us. We see you." But that's not what happened. The house was quiet as I finished getting ready. I checked my phone more times than I'll admit, hoping for a message. Something that would tell me they were on the way, asking where to park, wishing me good luck. Nothing came. Instead, an old group chat lit up, full of chatter about snacks for the Super Bowl party. My mother sent a picture of her famous dip, arranged perfectly on the coffee table. The caption full of exclamation points. My father joked about which team would disappoint him this year. Mason bragged about a bet he was placing. No one mentioned the ceremony. Not one of them asked if I was nervous or excited, or even breathing. I told myself they'd show that maybe this was just how they calmed their nerves. Distraction dressed as denial. I clung to that thought like a thread holding the whole day together. At the auditorium, families flooded the entrance in bursts of color, bouquets, balloons. Kids darting between legs while proud parents tried to wrangle them into pictures. My row was near the front, and the ushers had placed 3 seats aside with my last name printed neatly on the backs. It felt surreal seeing them there, reserved for people I had spent years trying to make proud. I smoothed my gown, checked my phone one more time. Still nothing. My chest tightened, but I swallowed it down, refusing to let the panic bloom. I took my seat, staring at those empty chairs as the lights dimmed. A small, ridiculous part of me whispered, maybe they'll slip in late. Maybe they're parking. Maybe the traffic. But then, another picture from the living room pinged onto my screen. The TV blared pregame commentary. My father's hand holding up a beer in the corner of the frame. Mason's laughter frozen mid-motion. That was when the truth finally pressed its weight onto my shoulders. They weren't coming. They had never planned to. The parking lot was colder than I expected. February wind whipped between the cars, slicing through my gown as if it had something to prove. I made it as far as the back row of the lot before my knees gave out. One moment, I was walking, holding my diploma with both hands, trying to breathe past the tightness in my throat. And the next, I was sitting on the curb, the world blurring around me. My phone buzzed again, and I didn't even want to look. It was another picture from the party. My mother grinning beside a tray of wings, my father raising a glass, Mason posing with friends. Not one of them wrote, "How did it go, Belle?" Or, "Send us a picture." Or, "We're sorry we missed it." The silence said more than words ever could. Tears hit my gown before I even realized I was crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs. Those might have helped. This was quieter. The kind of crying that feels like pressure giving way, each tear carrying years of swallowed disappointments. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my gown and laughed once. Humorless. I had crossed that stage alone while my family hosted a watch party for a game they'd already seen 100 times. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the crowds to thin. Long enough for the H in my chest to turn into something sharper, clarity. Or maybe it was the first flicker of anger, finally given permission to breathe. When my phone buzzed again, I didn't expect much. But it wasn't my family. It was my Aunt Helena. She'd seen the ceremony photos online. "Proud of you, sweetheart. Call me when you're free." The message was simple, but it settled differently inside me. Someone had seen me today. Someone who didn't want anything from me. I stared at those words while my breath fogged in the cold air. My diploma sat across my lap like a question I couldn't answer. What happens now? I couldn't go home and pretend it didn't hurt. I couldn't plaster on a smile and laugh at my father's jokes or Mason's excuses. Something inside me had shifted too far to slide back into place. That was the moment I opened the travel app. It wasn't dramatic. No triumphant music, no cinematic glow. Just me sitting on cold concrete. My thumb hovering over a list of flights I'd saved months ago. I'd always dismissed them as daydreams, trips I'd take someday when I had time, when I had money, when my family didn't need me. But they always needed me, and needing me had cost me everything. My finger moved before my fear could catch up. One-way ticket, Colorado. A retreat I'd bookmarked during a sleepless night, promising myself I'd go when life got less hectic. Life was never going to get less hectic. Not with them. The confirmation email pinged into my inbox. I felt the smallest exhale leave my body shaky, but real. For the first time in years, I hadn't chosen them. I had chosen me. I walked out of the auditorium, the sound of clapping still echoing in my ears, but it felt distant now. The diploma in my hand was heavy, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't the weight of accomplishment I had imagined. It was the weight of the truth that had finally settled in. The truth that my family had not only missed my graduation, but had intentionally chosen to stay away. A Super Bowl party was more important than their daughter's hard-earned achievement. I had spent my entire life trying to win their approval, trying to prove that I was worth their time, their love, their attention. And in that moment, it felt like all of that effort had been in vain. The parking lot was empty except for a few cars, and the cold February air sliced through the thin fabric of my gown. I didn't care. I had nothing left to feel except the dull throb of betrayal. I checked my phone, hoping for some sort of message, but all that popped up were pictures from the party. My mother had posted a picture of her famous dip, perfectly arranged on the coffee table. My father was holding a beer, laughing with Mason. No one mentioned the ceremony. No one even asked how it went. It was as if I didn't exist. I felt something sharp rise in my chest, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just sadness. It was anger. Real, raw anger. I had been here for them, year after year, sacrificing everything. And now, when it was my turn, they couldn't even be bothered to show up. I wasn't sure what hurt more, their neglect or the crushing realization that I had been hoping for something that would never come. I walked to my car, the heels of my shoes clicking against the pavement with every step. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the keys. But I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet. I stood there, staring at the empty seats in the front row of the auditorium. Trying to convince myself that maybe they had just gotten held up. Maybe they were stuck in traffic, or maybe they were waiting for the ceremony to be over before they showed up. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the truth. The truth was staring back at me, in the form of a picture of my father, grinning like everything was fine, holding his beer as if he were at a football game. Not the graduation of his daughter. I finally got into the car, slamming the door behind me. The chill from outside still clung to my skin, and for a second, I wondered if it was just easier to be numb to the hurt. But it didn't work. It wouldn't work. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I was tired of pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I sat there, clutching the steering wheel, the diploma resting on the passenger seat beside me. I didn't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the parking lot to clear out. Long enough for the cold to sink into my bones. But eventually, I wiped my eyes and started the car. I couldn't go home. I couldn't face them. The silence, the absence of their support, it would suffocate me. I needed to get away, even if just for a moment, even if just for a little while. Phone buzzed again. A message from my Aunt Helena. Saw the ceremony photos online. Proud of you, sweetheart. Call me when you're free. It was simple. It wasn't much. But it was enough. Enough to remind me that someone, somewhere cared. Someone had seen me. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling something shift inside me. Maybe this was what I needed to hear right now. Maybe I didn't have to keep trying to make my family see me. Maybe I could start seeing myself. The wind whipped against the car, but it didn't feel as cold anymore. I was starting to feel something else, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. I checked the flight app on my phone. I had been saving these flights, telling myself I'd go someday. Someday when I had time, when I had money, when life wasn't so chaotic. But life was never going to get less hectic. Not with them. Not with all the things they needed from me. I found the one-way flight to Colorado, the retreat I had bookmarked during sleepless nights, a place I had promised myself I'd go when everything wasn't so tangled up in guilt and obligation. I clicked the button. One-way ticket. Confirmation. Felt something shift in my chest. A small exhale. A breath that had been held for far too long. For the first time in years, I hadn't chosen them. I had chosen me. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward freedom. The plane touched down in Colorado, and as I looked out the window, the snow-covered mountains seemed almost too perfect to be real. The peaks, dusted with a layer of powdered snow, glistened under the bright blue sky, looking like something out of a dream. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass, letting the hum of the engine settle my racing thoughts. For the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The chaos of the past few days, the graduation, the tears, the weight of everything I had been carrying for years, felt like a distant memory as I stared at the vast landscape below. The noise, the pressure, the expectations had all melted away. There was nothing here but space. Space to breathe. Space to think. The retreat was nestled against a pine-covered hillside, quiet and untouched. When I stepped off the plane, the air was crisp and clean. Different from the heavy humidity of Hartford. It felt like a different world. I was a little dazed as I made my way to the small shuttle that would take me to the retreat. The driver, a woman with kind eyes and a soft voice, greeted me as if she already knew who I was. "Welcome, Marley," she said warmly. "We're glad you're here." Her voice, so genuine and free from expectation, made something inside me stir. For the first time in years, someone had greeted me without any strings attached. No demands. No guilt. Just a simple welcome. It was strange, almost foreign, but it felt good. It felt right. When I arrived at the retreat, the lobby smelled like cedar and citrus, warm and inviting. I took in the scent, trying to let it settle into my chest, but I was still carrying the weight of everything that had led me here. The receptionist gave me the key to my room, and I followed the path through the thick, towering trees to the small cabin. The view from the window was breathtaking. A frozen lake stretched out before me, the ice glistening in the late afternoon sun. I stood there for a while, just looking out at the stillness, feeling my shoulders begin to drop inch by inch. I hadn't even realized how tightly I had been holding myself. The tightness in my chest, the anxiety in my stomach, it all seemed to dissipate in the face of this quiet, untouched beauty. I felt the first real peace I had in months. I told myself the trip was just a break. A chance to reset before I went back to Hartford. Before I went back to my family and the life I had left behind. But even as I stood there, something inside me knew that it was more than that. I had been running on fumes for so long. I had been living for them, for their approval, their needs, their expectations, that I had forgotten how to live for myself. The stillness of the lake reminded me of how little I had been listening to myself. How much I had been giving without receiving. How much I had been giving without even asking if I was okay. I hadn't been okay for a long time, and it was only now, in the silence, that I could hear that truth clearly. I unpacked my things and settled into the room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't the noise of Hartford, or the constant buzz of family demands. It wasn't even the text messages that had kept me tethered to them, like strings pulling me back. It was the emptiness inside, the part of me that had always been hungry for their love and validation. The next morning, after a long night of fitful sleep, I woke up early. I walked outside to breathe in the fresh air. But I couldn't escape the familiar tug of my phone in my pocket. I had left everything behind, except for that damn phone. I pulled it out, reluctantly, and saw 15 missed messages. 13 were from my family, each one more urgent than the last. Mom, can you send a few hundred? Dad needs help with a bill. Masson lost my card again. None of them asked how I was doing. None of them congratulated me on graduating. None of them even acknowledged the fact that I had stepped onto that stage alone. And then there was the last message from my Aunt Helena. Honey, check your credit report now. My stomach dropped as I opened the app, my hands shaking. I scrolled through the report, and it felt like the floor beneath me was giving way. Accounts I didn't recognize. Loans I had never signed for. Inquiries stacking up like someone had gone shopping for my identity. Every last thing lined up with every emergency request they had made in the past few months. The money they hadn't needed. The money they had replaced with something far worse. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. They hadn't just neglected me. They hadn't just ignored my graduation. No. They had used me. They had used my future to fund their present. And the worst part, I had let them. I had let them take everything from me without ever asking for anything in return. The walls of the room felt smaller suddenly. The air felt colder. But even as the anger and disbelief rushed through me, I could feel something else stirring, a quiet, steady heat that surprised me. It wasn't just anger. It was recognition. Recognition that I had been living in a fog for so long, that I had let myself be a pawn in their game, that I had let their needs and wants eclipse my own. But not anymore. Not now. I closed the app and set the phone down on the nightstand. For the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of clarity. I didn't have to go back to them. I didn't have to keep sacrificing myself. I had a choice. And this time, I was going to choose me. I picked up the phone again, this time dialing the number of the lawyer my aunt had recommended. I wasn't sure what would come next. I wasn't sure how I was going to fight this or what it would take. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going back to that life. Not without a fight. For the first time in years, I was ready to fight for myself. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The air in Colorado was so crisp, so clean, that it seemed to pierce through the fog that had clouded my mind for so long. The retreat had been exactly what I needed, even if I didn't know it when I arrived. But the peace of the mountains didn't erase the weight of what I had discovered the night before. I got up early, wrapped in the quiet of the lodge, and went for a walk through the pine trees. The ground was still damp from the night's frost, and the air smelled like pine and earth. I needed to think, to process everything that had happened. But the more I walked, the more I realized there was no escaping it. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. I wasn't just hurt by their neglect. My family had taken something I could never get back. My future. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the familiar weight of it feeling wrong in my hands. I hadn't planned to check it. I hadn't planned on hearing from them again, but of course, there they were. 13 messages, all from my family. The usual requests: money, help, more excuses. None of them mentioned my graduation. Not one of them asked how I was doing or if I was okay. I opened the first one. It was from my mother. "Hey Belle. Can you send a few hundred? It's just for the next few days, then we'll pay you back." I scrolled through the rest. "Dad needs help with a bill. Mason lost his card again. Can you cover it?" There was no, "I'm proud of you." Or, "Sorry we missed your day." There was nothing. I felt my heart tighten. But I didn't let it overwhelm me. Not this time. I set the phone down on the bench beside me, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. This was my moment. I had the power to change the course of my life. I had been living for them for so long. I had let them take whatever they wanted from me, without ever asking for anything in return. I had sacrificed so much of myself in the hopes that one day they would see me, but they never would. And that was the hardest part of all. They didn't see me. They never had. I didn't want to be angry. Anger was too heavy. But the truth had settled in me like a stone. They hadn't just ignored my graduation. They hadn't just failed to show up. No. They had used me. They had taken my future and turned it into a safety net for themselves. And I had let them. The more I thought about it, the more it became clear. I couldn't go back to them. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness, my peace, just to be part of a family that didn't care. The first step had been leaving. The next step was taking action. I went inside, grabbed my laptop, and opened the documents I had been avoiding. The financial records, the credit report. I could barely look at the screen as I scrolled through the details, seeing the accounts and loans that weren't mine. The numbers seemed to blur together, but the weight of them was unmistakable. They had used my name, my credit, to fund their lives, to get what they wanted while leaving me in the dark. I could feel my hands shaking, but I forced myself to focus. I needed to act. I wasn't going to sit back anymore and let them run my life. This wasn't just a matter of money, it was my future. And I wasn't going to let them take that from me any longer. I found the number for the lawyer my aunt had recommended. I dialed the number, my heart pounding in my chest. When the receptionist answered, I was almost surprised at how steady my voice was. I didn't let myself hesitate. I scheduled an appointment for the next day. By the time I hung up the phone, the quiet of the retreat had settled over me again. I stood by the window, looking out at the lake. The water was still, reflecting the pale blue sky above. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I wasn't sure how this fight would go, or how long it would take, but I knew I was ready to face it. I had left Hartford. I had left my family behind. But the work wasn't done yet. The road to reclaiming my life had just begun. And this time, I was going to do it on my terms. The next few days passed in a blur. My time at the retreat was supposed to be a break, but instead, it felt like the calm before the storm. I had made the decision to fight back, but that didn't make it easier. The weight of the choices ahead of me pressed on my shoulders. And the more I thought about everything my family had taken from me, the more determined I became. I arrived at the lawyer's office a few days later. The building was small, tucked between two cafes in a quieter part of town. As I walked inside, the smell of coffee lingered in the air, and the receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. "Miss Rowan," she said, motioning toward a waiting area. "Carmen will be with you shortly." I nodded, sitting down in the small, cozy waiting room. I looked around at the shelves stacked with legal books and certificates on the walls, but I couldn't concentrate on any of it. My mind kept drifting back to my family, to the messages, to the betrayal. The words from the credit report echoed in my head, each one adding a little more weight to my chest. I had always known they took from me, but this was something else. Carmen walked in a few minutes later. She was in her early 40s, dressed in a sharp blazer, her presence calm but commanding. "Marley," she said, extending a hand. "It's good to meet you." I shook her hand, sitting down across from her at the small wooden desk. She looked over the papers I had brought with me, scanning them quickly before meeting my eyes. "This is bad," she said, her voice steady but serious. "This is more than just financial mismanagement. This is theft." I nodded, the words sinking deeper into my chest. "I knew it," I said quietly, almost to myself. "You've been taken advantage of, Marley. But we can fix this. We'll start by freezing your accounts, filing a restraining order, and getting you back on track. This will be a long process, but it's the first step to protecting yourself." Her words were practical, but they still held a sense of reassurance that I hadn't realized I needed. I had spent so long trying to protect my family, trying to fix everything for them, that hearing someone else, someone who didn't owe them anything, take my side felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. "We'll begin gathering evidence, and we'll take them to court if necessary," Carmen continued. "But this has to be done carefully. We don't want to tip them off too soon. This is your chance to take control back." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination run through me. It was time to stop being the person everyone leaned on. It was time to fight for myself. Over the next week, I sent everything Carmen asked for: documents, financial records, the names of any witnesses who could testify. I didn't know how long it would take or what the outcome would be, but I was ready. Ready to fight back. That Friday, Carmen called me with an update. "I've filed the restraining order, and we've frozen your accounts. It's a start. The next step is finding a way to make sure they don't do this again." I sat down at my kitchen table, absorbing the news. It was a small victory, but it felt like the first real step toward reclaiming control. For years, I had let them take whatever they wanted from me. I had let their needs, their demands, dictate my life. But now, that was changing. Later that evening, I found myself sitting by the window in my room, looking out at the mountains that surrounded the retreat. The stillness outside felt like a reflection of what I was trying to create inside myself: peace. The kind of peace that didn't come from appeasing others, but from standing firm in my own truth. I still didn't know how long this would take, or what would happen once the legal process started. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I was on solid ground, and I wasn't going to let anyone push me back under. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't about proving anything to my family. This was about taking my life back. It was about setting boundaries, standing up for myself, and, most importantly, learning how to prioritize my own well-being for the first time in my life. I had chosen to fight for me, and I wasn't going to back down. I thought I was ready, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. A week after the lawyer had filed the restraining order, I returned home to Hartford. The weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the fight for my future, felt like a storm waiting to hit. I had known that my family wouldn't take this lying down, but I had no idea how far they'd go to keep their grip on me. When I got to my apartment, everything seemed quiet, too quiet. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, scanning the room. It was the kind of silence that immediately set my nerves on edge. I hadn't been home for weeks, and for the first time, it felt different. Not the home I had left behind, but a place where the tension I had always carried seemed to weigh on the air. Before I could even put down my bag, I heard it. A knock. No, more than a knock. It was a pounding. Heavy, frantic blows against the door, the kind that made the frame vibrate. I froze. My heart raced, thudding in my chest. My hand hovered near my phone, but I didn't reach for it. Not yet. I knew what was coming. They had found me. They had come to take back control. "Annabelle." My father's voice shouted through the door. Open this door right now. I stood still, listening, my pulse quickening. I was paralyzed for a moment, unsure of what to do. I wanted to ignore it, to pretend like they weren't there. But the reality of what I had done, of what I had set in motion, was too real now. This was it. The moment where I would have to face them. Belle. My mother's voice broke through next. Please. We need to talk. It's important. I walked quietly to the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. Their faces filled the small circle, and the panic was evident in their eyes. My father's face was flushed, red from anger, and behind him, my mother looked desperate. Clutching her sweater, like was the only thing holding her together. Mason was with them, his phone held up as if he was recording this whole spectacle. The pounding on the door intensified, each blow like a hammer hitting the very foundation of my life. I felt the tension in my chest tighten, but I took a deep breath. I couldn't let them in. Not anymore. They couldn't keep doing this. Not to me. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed the number for my landlord. My voice was low, steady, but the fear underneath it was unmistakable. They're here, I said, barely above a whisper. Please call the police. I need them to leave. I hung up quickly, but the second I did, the door rattled again. We're your family. My father yelled, his voice full of accusation. You can't do this to us. Please, open the door, Belle. My mother pleaded. We need you. But it was too late for that. It had been too late for a long time. I stood there, my back to the door, my eyes closed as I felt the weight of everything pressing in on me. I had spent so many years pretending I wasn't being suffocated by them, that their needs didn't drain me. But now, the truth was clear. They had never needed me, not really. They had used me? They had always used me, and I had let them. The sound of sirens grew louder, and I could hear them. The officers arrived, and the pounding on the door stopped. There was a brief silence, then the sound of voices, sharp and authoritative, filled the space. The police were speaking with my family, their words too muffled for me to understand. But the weight lifted from my shoulders. They weren't getting in. Not today. Not ever again. I stood there unmoving, as the officers ushered my family out of my apartment. My father protested, his voice angry and demanding. Mason tried to record the scene, but the officers quickly intervened. Their voices firm as they told them they were violating a court order. Finally, they were gone. The hallway was quiet again. I felt the tension begin to leave my body, but the damage was done. I had faced them. I had stood my ground. As I sat down on the couch, my hands still trembling from the rush of adrenaline, I thought about everything that had led me to this point. Everything I had been through, everything I had sacrificed, all of it had led to this moment. This moment where I realized I was finally free. The weight of their control was gone. And, even though the fear still lingered, I knew that I could never back to the way things had been. I had taken the first real step in reclaiming my life. The past few weeks had been the hardest of my life, but they had also been the most important. I had fought for myself, and now, for the first time in a long time, I could breathe without looking over my shoulder. I didn't know what the next step would be, or how the rest of this journey would unfold, but for the first time, I didn't feel afraid of the unknown. I knew that, no matter what came next, I could handle it. And that was the most empowering feeling I'd ever had. It was a week later when I found myself standing backstage at a business leadership conference. The ballroom was massive, rows of chairs stretching out before me. A sea of people murmuring quietly as they waited for the event to begin. I had been invited to speak about financial independence, a topic I had become far too familiar with over the past few months. I went over my notes, trying to steady my hands. But the nerves were still there, just beneath the surface. It wasn't the speech itself that made me anxious. No, I had something more personal weighing on me. I had faced my family. I had taken the legal steps to protect myself. And now, here I was, about to speak in front of an audience, telling my story. I adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was the moment I had worked so hard for. This wasn't just about teaching others how to budget or save money. It was about showing them the power of taking control of their own lives, no matter the obstacles. It was about showing them that they didn't have to let anyone, or anything, hold them back. The applause that greeted me was polite, but distant. I smiled and began speaking. My voice a little shaky at first, but gaining strength with every word. I shared my story of struggle, of how I had been financially drained and emotionally exhausted by the people I loved most. How my family had used me for their own gain, never once stopping to consider what I needed. But as I continued to speak, I began to feel a shift. The words felt more natural, more real. I was no longer just telling a story, I was reclaiming my life. I was standing up, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever been in a situation where they felt powerless. I was showing them that they, too, could break free. Just as I thought I was finding my rhythm, it happened. I heard a loud crash from the back of the room. It sounded like something had fallen, but the next noise made my blood run cold. My father's voice. "That's our daughter," he shouted, cutting through my sentence. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat as I turned toward the sound. For a moment, I thought I might collapse right there on the stage. I couldn't believe it. I had been prepared for many things, awkward silences, uncomfortable stares, but this was something I hadn't expected. The doors to the ballroom burst open, and there they were. My parents, my brother, all of them, walking like they owned the place. My father's face was red with anger, his hands raised in accusation as he stormed down the aisle. My mother was clutching her chest dramatically, Mason's phone held up, recording the scene. "Annabelle," my father bellowed. "You left us with nothing. You ran off to get rich, and now you're turning your back on your family." The room went silent. Hundreds of heads turned to watch. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the shame creeping up on me, but I refused to shrink. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their world of manipulation and guilt. I had worked too hard to get here, to finally stand up for myself. "Annabelle, sweetheart, please talk to us," my mother pleaded, her voice faltering as she approached the stage. The audience was whispering now, confused. Some of them staring at me, as if they expected me to apologize. As if I should feel guilty for being the one who had finally stood up for herself. I could feel my breath quicken, but I didn't let it stop me. "Security," I said, my voice steady as I leaned into the microphone. "Please remove them. They are violating a court order." I watched as the security team moved in, their footsteps heavy against the silence of the room. My father's face twisted in rage, his eyes wild as the officers approached. "Court order," he yelled. "We're her family. How could she do this to us?" I looked straight at him, unflinching. "I protected myself. From all of you." The gasp that went through the crowd made me stand taller. It wasn't just the weight of my words, but the fact that I had said them aloud, finally, publicly, for everyone to hear. But it wasn't over. As the officers escorted my family out of the ballroom, my father's voice still rang in my ears. "You're tearing this family apart." I felt a flicker of something. Was it guilt? No, it couldn't be. Not anymore. The guilt had no place in this. As the doors closed behind them, the room seemed to hold its breath. I stood there, facing an audience that was still staring at me, unsure of what to say next. For a second, everything felt like it was spinning out of control. But then, I remembered why I was here. I remembered what I had come to say. I adjusted the microphone again, clearing my throat. "As I was saying," I continued, my voice stronger than before, "today, I want to talk about financial independence. But maybe we also need to talk about something else. What happens when the greatest threat to your financial stability comes from the people you love, and what it takes to walk away? The room was silent for a beat. Then slowly, it began to shift. The atmosphere in the room changed, as if they were no longer just listening to a speaker, but hearing someone's truth. I told them about the empty seats at my graduation, the tears I cried in the parking lot, the retreat in Colorado that had given me space to see what I needed to do. I shared about how I had spent so many years letting my family dictate my life, and how I had finally chosen to step away. I spoke about fear, about freedom, and about the choice to protect myself. When I finished, there was a long pause. And then, slowly, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't loud or wild, but it was there. A recognition. Not just of what I had said, but of what I had done. Of the strength it took to stand there, to speak my truth, and to not let anyone, family or otherwise, take that away from me again. As I stepped off the stage, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I had taken a step toward the life I had always wanted. The life that was mine. And no one, no matter who they were, could take that from me. I hadn't been in Hartford for long before I got the call. The promotion had come through, the one I had never expected. They wanted me to transfer to Portland. It wasn't just a job offer. It was the chance to start over. To leave behind the remnants of my old life. The toxic threads that had tied me to people who never truly saw me. It wasn't an easy decision. It never would be. But when I thought about everything I had gone through, everything I had fought for, I knew I couldn't stay in the place where my past had haunted me. Portland wasn't just a new city. It was a fresh start. It was the life I had dreamed of, the life where I didn't have to hide or apologize for my choices. I accepted without hesitation. The moment I hung up the phone, a weight lifted off my shoulders, and for the first time in so long, I felt light. It wasn't a magical fix to all my problems, but it was a step forward, a step towards something better. Packing up my apartment was surreal. As I folded clothes and organized my things, I couldn't help but think about everything I was leaving behind. The years of guilt, the emotional toll, the people who had never truly cared. I was shedding the past like a second skin. Tessa, a coworker who had become a close friend over the past year, helped me pack. She insisted on keeping a plant alive in my new apartment. Even though I was sure I would kill it within a week. But the idea of something small and vibrant in my new space felt right. It was a symbol of new beginnings. When the movers arrived to take my things, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. This was my choice. No one else's. The control was mine. Once, I was taking the reins of my own life. When I boarded the plane to Portland, the city I had only visited once before, I felt something strange. It wasn't fear, it was anticipation. There was no looking back anymore. I had finally put my family and their expectations behind me. I had finally chosen myself. The plane touched down, and as I looked out the window, the city sprawled beneath me. It wasn't like Hartford. It didn't feel like the same weighty air I had left behind. It was fresh and new. The streets were clean. The people seemed unhurried, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without suffocating. I settled into my new apartment in Portland, and the first thing I did was hang up my diploma. Not to prove anything to anyone, but as a reminder to myself. A reminder of how far I had come, and how much I had fought to get here. I kept my life quiet in those early weeks. I didn't share much with anyone about the past, about the emotional toll of everything I'd been through. I focused on my work, and slowly, I began to build a life that was mine and mine alone. The truth was, it hadn't been easy. Leaving behind my family, cutting ties with everything I had known, was the hardest thing I'd ever done. but it was also the most freeing. Every day felt like a small victory, like I was gaining back a piece of myself that had been lost for so long. Months passed, and I grew comfortable in Portland. The city became more familiar, my new colleagues became my friends, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere that wasn't tainted by guilt or manipulation. I had built something real, something I could stand on. Then came the Business Leadership Conference. It was a big deal. I was invited to speak on financial independence, a subject I had become deeply passionate about in the wake of everything I had learned. I hesitated at first. Part of me was terrified. Terrified that I might have to face my past again. But Carmen, the lawyer who had guided me through the legal battles, encouraged me. "Your voice could help someone who thinks they're alone," she had said. So I said yes. The day of the conference, I stood backstage, nervous but ready. This was my moment. I had something to say, not just about financial independence, but about freedom. About the power of walking away from a life that no longer served you. I stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding me for a moment. The applause was polite, but the audience's attention was all on me. I started my speech, sharing my story with them, letting them see the journey I had taken. The way my family's betrayal had opened my eyes to what really mattered. But just as I was finding my rhythm, it happened. The doors at the back of the ballroom flew open, and I heard a loud voice, my father's voice. "That's our daughter." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe it. How had they found me? The shock was brief, but enough to throw me off balance. I quickly composed myself and focused on what I had to do. My father and mother, both of them, came charging down the aisle toward me, with Mason filming it all. The audience stared, confused and silent, as they interrupted my speech. "You abandoned us," my father shouted. "Left us with nothing. And now you think you can stand up here, like everything's fine." I felt the heat rise in my chest. The same feeling I'd had when they'd shown up at my graduation, when they had made it all about themselves. But I didn't let the anger consume me. I couldn't. I had a choice. I leaned into the microphone, my voice steady and firm. "Security," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "Please remove them. They are in violation of a court order." The room went silent, the tension palpable as the security team moved in. My father railed against the officers, but it didn't matter anymore. They weren't in control of me anymore. As they were escorted out, my mother's face crumpled. She reached out for me, but I didn't flinch. This time, I wasn't afraid to be strong. "I protected myself," I said, letting the truth ring out. The room stayed quiet, and I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. But I didn't care anymore. I had done what I needed to do. I had taken control of my life. When they were finally escorted out, the silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the faint rustle of people shifting in their seats. But then, something shifted inside me, and I realized that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I took a deep breath and stepped back to the microphone. As I was saying, I began again, my voice calm. "Today I want to talk about what happens when you take back your life. When you stop letting the people who are supposed to love you take everything from you, and you decide that enough is enough." The audience began to clap, and this time, it wasn't polite applause. It was real. And for the first time in my life, I knew that I had found my place. I had built something that no one could take from me. Not anymore.